The morning sun broke over the San Gabriel Mountains, casting long shadows across the remote training facility nestled in the high desert of Southern California. The air was crisp and thin at this elevation, carrying the scent of sage and creosote from the surrounding wilderness. This was Echo Ridge, a classified Navy SEAL training compound where the most elite operators in the world came to sharpen skills that were already razor-edged. Lieutenant Commander Jake Brennan stood at the edge of a tactical obstacle course, his breath forming small clouds in the cold mountain air. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. At 34, Jake carried himself with the quiet, controlled presence of a man who had seen too much and said too little. His dark hair was cut military short, showing the first hints of silver at the temples. His gray-blue eyes held the 1,000-yard stare that came from too many missions in too many dark places. He wore standard training fatigues, the fabric still damp with sweat from the morning's 5-mile run. Beside him, perfectly aligned with his left knee, sat Thor. Thor was a 4-year-old German shepherd, 95 pounds of disciplined muscle and unwavering loyalty. His coat was a rich sable and black, his amber eyes constantly scanning the environment with an intelligence that unnerved strangers. Thor was not a pet. He was Jake's partner, his brother in arms, forged in the crucible of combat deployments across 3 continents. They had saved each other's lives more times than either could count. In Kandahar, Thor had detected an IED that would have vaporized Jake's entire squad. In the Philippines, Jake had carried Thor 3 miles through hostile jungle after the dog took shrapnel, protecting a wounded operator. Their bond transcended the typical handler-K9 relationship. It was telepathic, absolute, unbreakable. "Beautiful morning for it," called out Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, approaching from the equipment shed. Webb was in his early 40s, built like a fire hydrant, with weathered skin and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He was the senior K9 instructor at Echo Ridge, a man who had spent 20 years training military working dogs and the operators who relied on them. "If you like freezing your ass off," Jake replied, allowing himself a faint smile. He scratched Thor behind the ears, the only public affection he permitted himself while on duty. Thor's tail gave a single controlled thump. "Got the new stress course set up," Webb said, gesturing toward a complex maze of obstacles, walls, and simulated structures. "Command wants all K9 teams recertified on advanced threat detection under extreme psychological pressure. You know the drill." Jake nodded. The recertification wasn't optional. After a catastrophic failure on a joint operation in Yemen, where a K9 team had missed a concealed weapons cache, resulting in 3 casualties, the entire Special Operations K9 program was under scrutiny. Every team had to prove they could perform under conditions that pushed both handler and dog to their absolute limits. "What's the scenario?" Jake asked. "Hostage rescue simulation," Webb explained, pulling a laminated card from his pocket. "Building clearance, multiple rooms, civilian actors mixed with hostile targets. Thor needs to identify explosive materials, weapons caches, and concealed threats while you're under live fire simulation, blanks only, but with full noise and light effects. We're cranking the stress to 11. Jake looked down at Thor, who was watching Webb intently, ears pricked forward. "We've done worse in real life." "That's what worries me," Webb said, his expression turning serious. "Sometimes the dogs who've seen the most combat are the ones who break under training scenarios. The simulated stress triggers real memories. We've had 3 experienced MWDs wash out this month alone. PTSD isn't just a human problem, Lieutenant Commander." "Thor's solid," Jake said, but even as he spoke the words, a small knot of worry formed in his gut. The truth was, their last deployment had been brutal. A direct action mission in Somalia that had gone sideways, resulting in a firefight that lasted 7 hours. Thor had been magnificent, but Jake had seen something in his partner's eyes afterward, a shadow that hadn't been there before. "All right," Webb said, checking his watch. "You're up in 15. Get your gear squared away. The observers will be recording everything. This one goes straight to NAVSPECRA Command." As Webb walked away, Jake knelt beside Thor, bringing his face level with the dog's. "Just another day at the office, brother," he murmured. "We've got this." Thor's response was immediate. He pressed his forehead against Jake's, a gesture of complete trust that the dog only offered when they were alone. For just a moment, the warrior's mask slipped, and Jake felt the weight of responsibility that came with this partnership. Thor would die for him without hesitation. The question that haunted Jake's nightmares was whether he was worthy of that kind of loyalty. The training facility hummed with controlled activity. Other SEAL teams were running drills in adjacent sectors. The crack of simulated gunfire echoed from the kill house to the east. A helicopter roared overhead, practicing fast rope insertions on a mock-up oil platform. This was the machinery of American Special Operations, constantly grinding, constantly preparing for the next mission that would inevitably come. Jake stood, adjusting the tactical vest loaded with training equipment. His sidearm was loaded with simulated rounds that would trigger sensors on the target dummies. His rifle, slung across his chest, was similarly modified. Everything was designed to replicate combat conditions without live ammunition. Almost everything. He glanced at the obstacle course that stretched before them. A 3-story structure built to resemble a Middle Eastern compound, complete with narrow stairwells, hidden rooms, and pop-up targets that could appear from any direction. Speakers were concealed throughout, ready to blast the cacophony of combat, screaming, explosions, and chaos designed to overwhelm the senses. "Thor, heel," Jake commanded softly. The German Shepherd rose smoothly, taking position at Jake's left side. They moved together toward the starting point, their movements synchronized through years of training and combat. Other operators paused to watch. Everyone knew Jake and Thor. They were legends in the community, the gold standard for K-9 teams. The pressure of that reputation was a weight Jake carried silently. At the entrance to the course, a young ensign with a tablet waited. "Lieutenant Commander Brennan, your evaluation begins on my mark. You'll have 45 minutes to complete the full scenario. Standards are in your briefing packet. Questions?" "Negative," Jake said. "Thor's current certification expires in 72 hours," the ensign continued, reading from his screen. "This evaluation determines whether that certification is renewed or if the asset is removed from active duty status." Asset. The word made Jake's jaw tighten. Thor wasn't an asset. He was family. But that was the language of the bureaucracy that governed their world. "Understood," Jake said curtly. The ensign raised his hand. "On your mark. 3, 2, 1, execute." Jake and Thor moved through the entrance of the compound. The door swung shut behind them with a heavy metallic clang that echoed through the structure. For a moment, everything was silent. Jake could hear his own breathing, controlled and steady. Thor's nose was already working, sniffing the air in rapid bursts, cataloging every scent in the environment. They entered the first room. It was designed to look like a ransacked apartment. Overturned furniture, scattered papers, the smell of cooking spices, and decay. In the corner, a mannequin dressed as a civilian cowered against the wall. Jake scanned for threats while Thor moved methodically, nose to the ground. The dog stopped at a bookshelf. His body went rigid, then he sat, the passive alert for explosive materials. Jake moved to the location, using his tactical mirror to examine the shelf without exposing himself. Behind a row of books, he found the training device, a small block of simulated C4. "Good boy," Jake whispered. "Search." They moved deeper into the compound. The second room contained 3 mannequins, 2 dressed as civilians, 1 holding a weapon. Thor identified the armed target immediately, his low growl the warning Jake needed. The SEAL raised his rifle and double-tapped the hostile target, the sensors recording the hits. Then the stress began. The speakers erupted with the deafening roar of explosions. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness broken only by strobing emergency lighting. The screams began, recorded audio of women and children crying, men shouting in Arabic, the chaotic symphony of urban combat that Jake knew too well. Thor's ears flattened against his skull, but he held his position. Jake felt the dog's tension through the leash, the way his partner's body trembled with the effort of maintaining discipline against every instinct that screamed to flee. "Easy," Jake murmured, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Thor or himself. "We're okay, just training." They climbed the stairs to the second floor. The narrow stairwell was a fatal funnel, the kind of terrain that got operators killed. Jake moved with his rifle up, clearing angles, while Thor stayed tight to his leg. Halfway up, a target dummy dropped from the ceiling, a simulated suicide bomber with a vest. Jake's training took over. He fired, neutralizing the threat, his heart hammering. Thor barked once, sharp and aggressive, then fell silent, his discipline reasserting itself. The second floor was worse. Multiple rooms branched off a central hallway. The smoke machines had activated, filling the corridor with thick gray fog that stung Jake's eyes and made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet. The audio assault intensified. Gunfire, explosions, the whip crack of rounds passing close. Thor was panting now, his stress visible. But he pushed forward, checking each room as Jake cleared it. In the third room, the dog alerted again. This time, it was a concealed weapons cache, hidden beneath floorboards that had been deliberately loosened. Jake marked it and moved on. They reached the final room on the second floor. The door was partially open, hanging crooked on its hinges. Jake could see movement inside, shadows cast by the strobing lights. He stacked on the door, preparing to enter, when Thor did something he had never done before in 4 years of partnership. The dog stopped. Simply stopped moving, as if he had hit an invisible wall. His entire body went rigid, muscles bunching beneath his fur. His head lowered, and a growl emerged from deep in his chest. But this wasn't the controlled warning growl Jake knew. This was primal, visceral, the sound of an animal confronting mortal danger. "Thor," Jake said softly, testing. "Search." The dog didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the doorway, his lips curling back from his teeth. The growl intensified, becoming a continuous rumble that Jake could feel through the leash. "Easy, partner," Jake said, his tone firmer. "We need to clear this room. Let's go." Thor's response was immediate and shocking. He lunged backward, pulling away from the door with such force that the leash nearly slipped from Jake's grip. The dog planted all 4 feet, his claws scraping against the concrete floor, his entire body language screaming one message: "Danger, do not enter. Retreat now." Jake felt a cold sweat break out across his back. In 4 years, through firefights and explosions, through situations that would have broken lesser dogs, Thor had never refused a command. Never. The dog was trained to the point where obedience was literally beaten into his DNA. For him to refuse like this meant something was catastrophically wrong. "Control, this is Brennan," Jake said into his radio. "I'm calling an abort. Thor is showing extreme stress response. We need to pause the evaluation." The response crackled back immediately. "Negative, Brennan. You have 30 minutes remaining. Complete the scenario or it's a failure. Continue mission." Jake stared at the partially open door. Through the gap, he could see nothing but shadows and the flickering emergency lights. The audio assault continued, screams and gunfire creating a wall of sound that made thinking difficult. Standard procedure said to trust the mission parameters. The evaluators knew what they were doing. This was a controlled environment. But Thor's behavior was not standard. Jake looked down at his partner. The German shepherd was trembling now, his entire body vibrating with barely contained panic. His eyes met Jake's, and in that moment of connection, Jake saw something that made his blood run cold. It wasn't fear. It was certainty. Thor knew something was wrong, something the human couldn't sense, couldn't see, couldn't understand. "Brennan, acknowledge." The radio squawked. "Are you continuing or aborting?" This was the moment. Jake could follow orders, complete the evaluation, and maintain his reputation. Or he could trust his partner, the dog who had saved his life more times than he could count, and face the consequences of disobeying a direct command during a formal assessment. The weight of that choice pressed down on him like a physical thing. His career hung in the balance. Thor's certification, their partnership, everything they had built together, all of it teetered on the edge of this single decision. Thor lunged again, this time not backward but forward, his jaws snapping. He wasn't trying to enter the room, he was trying to pull Jake away from it. The dog's teeth caught the edge of Jake's tactical vest, and for the first time in their partnership, Thor violated the absolute rule: never bite your handler. The dog yanked backward with all his strength, and Jake stumbled, pulled off balance. As he fell, his hand instinctively went to his sidearm, combat reflexes taking over. For a split second that seemed to stretch into eternity, man and dog were locked in a struggle. To anyone watching, it would look like the dog was attacking his handler. But Jake, even as he hit the ground, understood. Thor wasn't attacking. Thor was saving him. The dog was doing the only thing his training and instincts would allow, using force to remove his handler from imminent danger that the human was too blind to see. "Stand down!" a voice bellowed. Chief Webb came pounding up the stairs, followed by two other instructors. "Secure that animal!" But Jake was faster. From the ground, he grabbed Thor's vest and pulled the dog close, wrapping his arms around the trembling animal. "Nobody touches him," Jake snarled, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made the instructors pause. "Something's wrong with this room." "The room is fine, Lieutenant Commander," Webb said, his voice tight with frustration. "It's your dog that's malfunctioning. We need to remove him from the scenario now." "Then you clear the room," Jake said, not releasing Thor. "Go ahead, Chief. Walk through that door." Webb's jaw tightened. He moved toward the door, hand on his sidearm. "This is ridiculous. It's a training room, Brennan. There's nothing." Thor exploded into another frenzy of barking, his entire body straining toward Webb, every fiber of his being screaming a warning. The sound was so intense, so desperate, that even Webb hesitated. "Something's wrong," Jake repeated, his voice absolutely certain now. "I'm calling a full safety halt. Nobody enters that room until we've inspected it." "That's not your call to make," Webb started, but Jake cut him off. "Thor has never been wrong, not once. Not in Kandahar, not in Somalia, not anywhere. When he alerts like this, people live. When we ignore him, people die. So, I'm making it my call, Chief. Shut down this evaluation and get a safety team in here now." The tension in the hallway was electric. The other instructors had their hands on their weapons, uncertain. Thor continued his desperate barking, his message clear to anyone willing to listen. Through the chaos and the smoke and the fear, Jake held his ground, trusting the one thing he had always been able to trust: his partner. Webb stared at Jake for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then, slowly, he raised his radio. "Control, this is Webb. Execute full safety halt on course Alpha. I repeat, full safety halt. Nobody moves until I say so." The speakers fell silent. The strobing light steadied into harsh white fluorescence. The smoke began to clear, pulled away by hidden ventilation systems. In the sudden quiet, Thor's barking became the only sound, echoing off the concrete walls. "All right," Webb said, his voice grim. "Let's find out what your dog is so afraid of." The emergency response was swift and professional. Within 5 minutes, the training compound was locked down. The course evaluators, the safety officers, and a full hazardous materials team converged on the second-floor corridor. Jake and Thor had been moved to a safe distance, but Jake refused to go any further. He stood at the top of the stairs. Thor pressed against his leg, watching as the safety team approached the partially open door. Lieutenant Sarah Vance, the facility's senior safety officer, was a compact woman in her late 30s with sharp green eyes and an air of no-nonsense competence. She wore full protective gear, helmet with face shield, and carried a handheld explosive detector. "Chief Webb," she called out, her voice muffled by the equipment. "I'm reading something unusual. Elevated chemical signatures near the doorframe. It's faint, but it's there." Webb's face went pale. "What kind of Chemical? That's what concerns me, Vance replied. It's not matching any of the standard training compounds we use. I'm getting trace elements of something organic, possibly biological. The words sent a chill through everyone present. Biological threats were the nightmare scenario, the invisible killer that could devastate a facility before anyone even knew they were exposed. Get a full hazmat team, Webb ordered. Nobody approaches that room without Level A protection. Brennan, get your dog out of this building now. But Jake was already moving, guiding Thor down the stairs and out into the cold mountain air. The moment they cleared the building, Thor's entire demeanor changed. The desperate aggression vanished, replaced by his normal, disciplined calm. He sat beside Jake, looking up at his handler with those intelligent amber eyes that seemed to say, "I told you so." Jake knelt, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. His hands were shaking, the adrenaline finally catching up with him. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice rough. "Good boy, Thor. You saved us again." Behind them, the facility was transforming into a hazmat scene. Personnel in white protective suits were entering the building, carrying sophisticated detection equipment. The casual training atmosphere had been replaced by the grim efficiency of a potential crisis response. Chief Webb approached, his face gray with stress and what might have been growing horror. "Brennan, I need you to tell me everything, every detail of Thor's behavior. Leave nothing out." Jake stood, his military discipline reasserting itself. He stopped dead about 5 feet from the door, refused to advance, which he's never done. Then he showed extreme aggression, not toward a target but toward the doorway itself. When I tried to continue the mission, he physically pulled me back. Then he bit my vest and dragged me away from the door. "Did he alert for explosives?" Webb asked. "No," Jake said, thinking back carefully. "His explosive alert is a passive sit. This was different. This was active threat warning. The kind of behavior he shows when Jake stopped, a terrible realization dawning." "When what?" Webb pressed. "When he detects human threat," Jake said slowly. "When someone with hostile intent is close, we trained him on it in Afghanistan. He can smell the chemical changes in human sweat, the stress hormones that spike when someone's preparing for violence. He used it to identify suicide bombers who were trying to blend into crowds." Webb's jaw clenched. "There's no one in that room, Brennan. It's a training facility. We know every person on this base." "Then maybe it's not the room," Jake said, his tactical mind starting to work through possibilities. "Maybe it's what's been placed in the room. Something that carries a human scent signature. Something that someone with hostile intent put there." Before Webb could respond, Lieutenant Vance emerged from the building, moving fast despite her bulky protective gear. She pulled off her helmet, her face flushed and her eyes wide. "Chief, we have a major problem," she announced, her voice tight. "That room is contaminated with a biological agent. It's aerosolized, contained in the ventilation system, set to disperse once the door was fully opened. Another 30 seconds and everyone on that floor would have been exposed." The silence that followed was absolute. Every person in the area understood the implications. This wasn't a training malfunction. This was sabotage. This was attempted murder. "What kind of agent?" Webb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Unknown," Vance replied. "We're running samples now, but preliminary analysis suggests it's something exotic. Not anthrax, not ricin. Something we don't have in our database. Whatever it is, it was professionally deployed. This was deliberate, sophisticated, and designed to kill." Jake's mind was racing. Echo Ridge was one of the most secure facilities in the country. Access was restricted to personnel with top-secret clearances. The idea that someone had infiltrated it, had planted a biological weapon in a training course, was almost incomprehensible. Almost. "The evaluation schedule," Jake said suddenly. "Who knew I was running this course today?" Webb pulled out his phone, scrolling through his messages. The standard distribution list. Command staff, safety officers, the training cadre, maybe 20 people total. Who had physical access to that room in the last 24 hours? "Maintenance crew did a safety check yesterday afternoon," Vance said, checking her own device. Standard pre-evaluation protocol. They cleared it at 1,600 hours. After that, the room was sealed until your run this morning. I need the names of that maintenance crew, Jake said. Now. Webb hesitated. Brennan, you're not an investigator. This is now a federal crime scene. NCIS will handle it. My dog just saved this entire facility from a biological attack, Jake said, his voice carrying an edge of barely controlled fury. Someone tried to kill me, kill Thor, and probably kill everyone who would have responded to the contamination. So, with respect, Chief, I'm not waiting for NCIS to show up with their paperwork and their procedures. Thor found this threat. We're going to find who planted it. I agree. The new voice came from behind them. A woman approached, wearing dark slacks and a navy windbreaker with NCIS emblazoned on the back. She was in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail and sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. She carried herself with the confident authority of someone used to operating in military spaces. Special Agent Rachel Torres, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, she announced, holding up her credentials. I was already on base investigating an unrelated matter. I've been read into the situation. Lieutenant Commander Brennan, Chief Webb, Lieutenant Vance, nobody leaves this facility. As of this moment, Echo Ridge is a crime scene, and everyone on it is a potential witness or suspect. Jake studied her. Unlike the typical federal agent stereotype, Torres didn't carry an air of bureaucratic detachment. Her eyes were sharp, analytical, but there was something else there. A hunter's intensity that Jake recognized because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. Special Agent I. Webb started, but Torres cut him off. Chief, I need your complete cooperation. This facility is now under federal jurisdiction. Lieutenant Commander Brennan. She turned to Jake, her gaze assessing. Your K-9 partner detected the threat. I'm going to need every detail of his training, his capabilities, and his behavior today. In my experience, military working dogs have instincts that can't be explained by standard training protocols. Your dog knew. I need to understand how. Jake nodded slowly. Thor's trained in explosive detection, weapons identification, and threat assessment. But his real gift is reading intent. He can detect the chemical signatures of fear, aggression, and stress in humans. It's saved us more times than I can count. So he didn't smell the biological agent, Torres said, thinking aloud. He smelled the person who planted it. The residual scent of their stress, their hostile intent, left behind in that room. That's my assessment, Jake confirmed. Torres looked at Thor, who sat calmly beside Jake, watching the new human with polite interest. Can he track that scent? Can he identify the person who was in that room? Jake's pulse quickened. If their scent is still on base, yes. Thor's tracking ability is exceptional. He once tracked a target through 3 miles of jungle, across 2 rivers, in a rainstorm. A climate-controlled building would be easy by comparison. Then, that's where we start, Torres said. She pulled out her radio. This is Special Agent Torres. I'm authorizing a full base lockdown. Nobody enters or exits Echo Ridge until further notice. I want the personnel roster for the last 48 hours on my desk in 10 minutes. And someone get me the service records for every member of the maintenance crew who touched that training room yesterday. As base security began implementing the lockdown, Torres turned back to Jake. Lieutenant Commander, I'm requisitioning you and your K-9 partner for this investigation. We're going to find who did this, and we're going to do it fast, before they realize their plan failed and try to run. Jake felt Thor shift beside him, the dog's anticipation palpable. They had trained for this, not explicitly, but every instinct they had honed in combat was transferable to this new hunt. Somewhere on this base was someone who had tried to kill them, someone who had weaponized a secure training facility, someone who was right now probably watching and waiting to see if their trap had worked. Thor and I are ready, Jake said, his voice cold and certain. Let's go hunting. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. The base had transformed from a training facility into a lockdown crime scene. Military police had established checkpoints at every exit. The hazmat team was still working in the contaminated training room, carefully cataloging the biological delivery system. And Jake, Thor, and Special Agent Torres were in the facility's security office, surrounded by monitors and files. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible true stories of courage and loyalty. The maintenance crew that accessed the room yesterday consisted of 4 people, Torres said, spreading their service jackets across the table. Petty Officer 2nd Class Marcus Reeves, Petty Officer 3rd Class Jennifer Cho, Seaman Devin Harris, and Civilian Contractor Thomas Vickers. Jake studied the photographs and service records. 3 of them were standard military personnel, with clean records and years of service. But the 4th, Thomas Vickers, caught his attention. "This one," Jake said, tapping Vickers's file. "Civilian contractor. How long has he been on base?" 6 months, Torres replied, pulling up his full background check on her laptop. Former Army Ranger, served 8 years, received a medical discharge after an injury in Iraq. Clean record, multiple security clearances. He's been working facility maintenance across various Special Operations Command installations. "What was the injury?" Jake asked. Torres scrolled through the medical records. Traumatic brain injury from an IED blast. He spent 2 years in rehabilitation. Psychological evaluation shows some PTSD symptoms, but he was cleared for work in secure facilities. Jake exchanged a glance with Torres. They were both thinking the same thing. TBI could change people, could create vulnerabilities that didn't show up on standard screenings. Add PTSD to the mix, and you had someone who might be susceptible to manipulation, coercion, or radicalization. "Where is Vickers now?" Jake asked. Torres checked her radio log. "Security has him in the administrative building with the rest of the maintenance crew. They're all being held separately for questioning. Thor needs to check that training room first," Jake said. "We need to establish a baseline scent profile. Then we can introduce him to the maintenance crew and see if he identifies anyone." "Won't that compromise the crime scene?" Torres asked. "Your hazmat team has already photographed everything," Jake pointed out. "And whatever biological agent was in there has been neutralized by now. Thor's not going to disturb evidence. He's going to find evidence you can't detect any other way." Torres considered this for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but I'm coming with you. I want to see how this works." 20 minutes later, Jake, Thor, and Torres were standing outside the sealed training room, now cleared by the hazmat team, but still marked with bright yellow caution tape. Lieutenant Vance had confirmed that the biological agent had been contained and neutralized, though they still didn't know what it was. Samples had been sent to a military lab for analysis. "Before we go in," Torres said, pulling on a pair of nitrile gloves, "explain to me exactly what Thor is going to do." Jake knelt beside his partner, his hand resting on Thor's head. "Dogs don't smell the way humans do. We smell a pot of stew and recognize it as stew. A dog smells every individual ingredient, the beef, the carrots, the onions, the spices, each component separate and distinct. Thor is trained to identify specific chemical signatures associated with human stress and hostile intent. Adrenaline, cortisol, the pheromones released when someone is preparing for violence or experiencing extreme fear. And those chemical signatures linger for hours, sometimes days, depending on the concentration and environmental conditions," Jake confirmed. "The person who planted that biological weapon would have been under extreme stress. Their sweat, their breath, every touch they made in this room would have left traces of that chemical cocktail. Thor can detect it and track it." "That's incredible," Torres said quietly, "and inadmissible in any courtroom I've ever practiced in." "We're not building a court case," Jake said, his voice hardening. "Not yet. We're identifying a suspect. Once we know who, you can build your evidence chain the traditional way. But Thor gets us there faster than any investigation could." Torres nodded slowly, understanding the pragmatic logic. "All right, let's see what your partner can do." Jake stood and looked at Thor. The German Shepherd was alert, focused, his entire body language broadcasting readiness. "Thor," Jake said, his voice shifting to the calm, authoritative command tone. "Seek. Find the threat." Thor moved into the room with fluid precision. His nose went to work immediately, sniffing in the rapid, rhythmic bursts of a professional. He moved systematically, covering every surface, every corner, every object in the room. Jake and Torres followed, maintaining distance, so they didn't contaminate the dog's work. Thor stopped at the doorframe, the exact spot where he had refused to enter during the training exercise. His body went rigid, the classic alert posture. He sniffed intensely, his nostrils flaring, then let out a low, sustained growl. The message was clear. This is where the threat was strongest. "He's marking the delivery point," Jake murmured. "This is where the biological weapon was placed." Thor continued his search, moving to the ventilation grate on the far wall where the biological agent had been deployed. Again, the rigid alert, the intense sniffing. But then the dog did something unexpected. He turned away from the obvious evidence and moved to a seemingly innocuous spot on the floor near the corner of the room. The dog sat, his passive alert for an item of interest. Jake approached carefully, examining the spot. It looked like nothing, just bare concrete. But when he knelt and looked closely, he could see a faint scuff. Mark barely visible. Someone had stood here for an extended period, shifting their weight, leaving the ghost of their presence. "Torres," Jake called. "I need evidence markers here." Thor's found a secondary location. Someone stood in this exact spot for a significant amount of time. Torres placed a marker and took photographs. Why is that significant? "Because that spot has perfect line of sight to the ventilation grate," Jake explained. "Someone stood here, watching, making sure the device was properly installed. They weren't just rushing in and out. They took their time. They were confident. They felt safe." Thor's nose was working overtime now, tracing an invisible path across the floor from the corner to the door, then out into the hallway. The dog was following a scent trail that only he could detect, the chemical ghost of footsteps left hours before. "He's got the track," Jake said, adrenaline spiking. "Thor, forward. Track." The German shepherd moved with purpose, his nose skimming the floor, following an invisible trail. They moved out of the training room, down the corridor, down the stairs. Torres followed, her phone out, documenting every turn, every location where Thor showed heightened interest. The trail led them out of the training building and across the compound grounds. Thor moved with increasing confidence, his pace quickening. They passed the administrative building, the armory, the vehicle depot. Personnel stopped to watch the unusual procession. A Navy SEAL, a federal agent, and a German shepherd moving with singular purpose across the base. Thor stopped at a small building near the perimeter fence. It was an auxiliary storage facility, rarely used, its metal door secured with a standard padlock. The dog sat, staring at the door, his body vibrating with contained energy. Then he let out a single, sharp bark. The alert for a located target. "This is it," Jake said quietly. "The scent trail ends here." Torres was already on her radio. "This is Special Agent Torres. I need backup at Storage Facility 7, Northeast Quadrant, possible suspect location. Approach with extreme caution." Within minutes, a tactical response team had surrounded the building. Jake and Thor were positioned to one side, providing overwatch. Torres, now wearing a ballistic vest, approached the door with 2 MPs flanking her. "Federal agent," she called out, "if there's anyone inside, come out with your hands visible. This facility is surrounded." Silence. The mountain wind whispered through the high desert sage. Then, slowly, the door opened from the inside. Thomas Vickers stood in the doorway, his hands raised, his face a mask of resignation and something else. Relief, perhaps. The relief of someone whose secret had finally been uncovered and the weight of it could finally be released. "I knew the dog would find me," Vickers said quietly, his voice surprisingly calm. "I watched the training exercise from the security feed. When the dog refused to enter that room, when he pulled the lieutenant back, I knew it was over. Military working dogs, they're better than any technology we have, better than cameras, better than sensors. They just know." Torres and the MPs moved forward, securing Vickers with professional efficiency. They cuffed him and began the standard search protocol. Jake held Thor back, but the dog was straining against the leash, not with aggression, but with a strange whining sound. It wasn't his aggressive alert. It was something else. Distress, perhaps. Confusion. "Something's wrong," Jake said, his instinct screaming. "Torres, wait." But it was too late. One of the MPs, searching Vickers's jacket, pulled out a small device. It looked innocuous, like a garage door opener or a key fob. But Jake had seen enough improvised detonators to recognize the design. "Dead man switch!" Jake shouted. "Everyone back!" The world seemed to slow down. Vickers smiled, a sad, terrible smile. "I'm sorry," he said, and opened his hand. Thor didn't hesitate. The German shepherd lunged forward with every ounce of strength in his body, the leash burning through Jake's hands. The dog hit Vickers in the chest, driving him backward into the storage facility. The dead man's switch clattered to the ground, and for a split second, nothing happened. Then the world exploded. The blast wave lifted Jake off his feet and threw him backward 15 feet. He hit the ground hard, the wind driven from his lungs, his ears ringing with a high-pitched whine that drowned out all other sound. Smoke and dust billowed from the storage facility, now a shattered ruin. Debris rained down around them. Jake struggled to his feet, his body moving on autopilot, even as his mind screamed in denial. "Thor." His voice was raw, desperate. "Thor." Through the smoke and chaos, he saw movement. A figure staggered out of the ruined building, covered in dust and blood. It was Torres, her ballistic vest scorched but intact. One of the MPs crawled out behind her, coughing. But Jake's eyes were locked on the smoking doorway, searching desperately for any sign of his partner. "Thor!" he shouted again, stumbling forward. And then he saw him. Thor emerged from the wreckage, limping badly, his fur singed and bloody. But he was moving. He was alive. The dog's eyes found Jake, and despite the pain that must have been racking his body, his tail gave a single, weak wag. Jake ran, or tried to. His legs didn't seem to be working properly. His balance was off. But he covered the distance between them and dropped to his knees beside his partner. His hands moved over Thor's body, assessing damage through years of combat medical training. Burns on the dog's front legs and chest. A deep laceration on his right flank, bleeding heavily. His breathing was labored, painful. But his eyes were clear, focused on Jake with that unwavering trust that had defined their partnership. "Medic!" Jake screamed, his voice breaking. "I need a veterinary medic. Now!" Someone was pressing bandages into his hands. Jake applied pressure to Thor's wound, his training taking over even as his heart was shattering. "Stay with me," he whispered, his face close to Thor's. "That's an order, soldier. You stay with me." Thor's tongue lolled out, licking Jake's face weakly. The gesture was so quintessentially Thor, so full of trust and affection even in extremis, that Jake felt tears streaming down his face. "The dog saved us," Torres was saying somewhere behind him, her voice shaky. Vickers was rigged with secondary explosives. The switch activated a vest bomb. If the dog hadn't pushed him back inside, we'd all be dead. That dog saved every one of us. But Jake wasn't listening to her. His entire world had narrowed to the injured animal in his arms and the desperate need to keep him alive. "Don't you dare die on me," he said, his voice fierce. "You've saved me too many times. Now let me save you. Just hold on, please, God. Just hold on." The veterinary emergency response team arrived in a blur of action. They had Thor on a stretcher, starting IV lines, assessing vitals. Jake tried to climb into the ambulance with them, but someone held him back. "Sir, you're injured," a corpsman said. "You need medical attention." Jake looked down at himself in surprise. He hadn't even noticed the blood soaking through his uniform, the cuts and burns that covered his arms. "I don't care," he said numbly. "I need to be with Thor." "Lieutenant Commander." Torres was there, her hand on his arm. Her face was smudged with soot, her eyes sharp despite the shock they'd all just endured. "Let them do their job. The veterinary team at this base is the best in the world." They'll save him." "He saved us," Jake said, his voice hollow. "He saved everyone." "I know," Torres said gently. "Now let them save him." The ambulance doors closed, and Jake watched it race away across the compound, its siren wailing. He stood there, swaying slightly, feeling the adrenaline drain away and leave him hollow and cold. Around him, the base had erupted into controlled chaos. Fire teams were extinguishing the remaining flames. Security was establishing a new perimeter. The crime scene had just become exponentially more complicated. Jake felt Torres guiding him toward another medical vehicle. He moved mechanically, his body obeying while his mind was miles away, racing alongside that ambulance, silently begging the universe not to take his partner away. "Vickers?" he asked, his voice distant. "Dead," Torres confirmed quietly. The secondary explosives were in a vest under his jacket, designed to kill everyone within a 20-foot radius. When your dog pushed him back into that building, the walls contained most of the blast. Vickers took the full force of it. "Why?" Jake asked. "Why would he do this?" Torres hesitated, then pulled out her phone, showing him a message from her office. "We found communications on Vickers's laptop. He'd been recruited by a foreign intelligence service 6 months ago. They exploited his PTSD, his financial troubles, his anger at being discharged. They wanted him to eliminate key SEAL personnel and operators. You were the primary target, Lieutenant Commander. Your team has been responsible for disrupting their operations in 3 different countries. They wanted you dead." Jake absorbed this information distantly. It made sense in the cold logic of espionage and counterintelligence. He and his team had made powerful enemies. But none of that mattered right now. All that mattered was Thor, fighting for his life in a veterinary operating room. "The biological agent," Torres continued, "preliminary analysis suggests it was a hemorrhagic fever virus, something exotic and deadly. If you had entered that room, if the aerosol had deployed, you would have died within hours. Probably everyone who responded to help you would have died too. We're talking about a potential casualty count of 50 to 100 personnel before we could have contained it." "Thor knew," Jake said simply. "He knew something was wrong. He tried to tell me, and I almost didn't listen." "But you did listen," Torres pointed out. "You trusted your partner over direct orders, over your training, over what your eyes were telling you was safe. That trust saved this entire base." The corpsman finished bandaging Jake's wounds and cleared him to leave. "You should get proper treatment at the hospital," the medic advised. "Some of these burns are second degree." "Later," Jake said, his voice flat. "Where did they take Thor?" "The veterinary hospital, Building 19, Torres said. "I'll drive you." The drive across the base felt endless, though it was probably less than 5 minutes. Jake sat in the passenger seat of Torres's government sedan, staring at his hands. They were shaking, fine tremors that he couldn't control. Combat stress he knew intellectually. His body was crashing after the adrenaline spike, but it felt like something deeper, like his very foundation was cracking. Thor was more than a partner, more than a K-9 asset, in military terminology. Thor was the one constant in a life defined by chaos and violence. Thor was loyalty distilled into flesh and bone and fur. The thought of losing him was a void Jake couldn't bring himself to contemplate. The veterinary hospital was a state-of-the-art facility, one of the best in the military system. Torres pulled up to the entrance, and Jake was out of the car before it had fully stopped. He ran through the doors, his injuries forgotten, and nearly collided with Chief Webb in the waiting area. "Brennan," Webb said, gripping his arm. "They've got him in surgery. The chief veterinary surgeon is working on him personally. She's the best, Jake. If anyone can save him, it's Dr. Keller." Jake nodded mutely, unable to form words. He sank into a chair in the waiting room, his head in his hands. Torres sat beside him, not speaking, just a solid presence. Minutes crawled by. An hour. 2. Staff came and went, their faces carefully neutral. Jake existed in a limbo of dread and desperate hope. Finally, a woman in surgical scrubs emerged through the double doors. Amanda Keller was in her mid-40s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back and eyes that had seen too many wounded animals to count. Her scrubs were splattered with blood. "Lieutenant Commander Brennan?" she asked. Jake stood so fast he nearly fell over. "How is he, Doctor?" Keller's face was professionally composed, but Jake could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Thor is stable. He's out of surgery and in recovery. He sustained severe burns to his chest and front legs, a deep laceration to his right flank that required extensive suturing, and some internal bruising consistent with blast trauma. But there's no evidence of organ damage, no shrapnel penetration, and his vital signs are strong." Jake felt his knees go weak with relief. "He's going to make it." "He's going to make it," Dr. Keller confirmed, and a small smile broke through her professional mask. "That's one tough dog, Lieutenant Commander. His conditioning and training probably saved his life. A lesser animal wouldn't have survived those injuries." "Can I see him?" Dr. Keller hesitated. "He's still under anesthesia. He won't wake up for another few hours. You should get your own injuries properly treated, get some rest, and come back when—" "Please," Jake interrupted, his voice raw. "I need to see him. I need him to know I'm here." The veterinarian studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but only for a few minutes. He needs rest, and frankly, so do you." She led Jake through the surgical suite to a recovery room. Thor lay on a padded table surrounded by monitors and IV lines. His front legs and chest were wrapped in white bandages, stark against his sable fur. His breathing was steady, assisted by a nasal oxygen line. He looked small, vulnerable in a way Jake had never seen before. Jake approached slowly, afraid to disturb the fragile piece. He pulled up a chair beside the table and carefully placed his hand on Thor's head, avoiding the bandaged areas. The fur was still warm, still soft. The familiar texture was an anchor in a world that had been turned upside down. "Hey, partner," Jake whispered, his voice thick. "You did it again. You saved everyone. You saved me." His thumb stroked gently between Thor's ears, the way the dog loved. "I'm so sorry I almost didn't listen. I'm so sorry I put you in danger. But you're going to be okay. Dr. Keller says you're going to be fine. And I'm going to be right here when you wake up. I'm not going anywhere." Thor's ear twitched slightly, the only sign that maybe, somewhere in the depths of his medicated sleep, he could hear his handler's voice. "You rest now," Jake continued. "You've earned it. You're the best partner I could ever ask for, the best friend I've ever had. I don't know what I'd do without you." His voice cracked on the last words, and he bowed his head, pressing his forehead gently against Thor's side. Dr. Keller touched his shoulder gently. "Lieutenant Commander, you need to let him rest now. You can come back in a few hours." Jake nodded reluctantly, standing up. He gave Thor one last gentle stroke, then forced himself to walk away. It was one of the hardest things he'd ever done. Back in the waiting room, Torres was still there, now joined by Chief Webb and several other members of the training cadre. They all stood when Jake emerged. "He's stable," Jake announced, and saw the collective relief on their faces. "He's going to recover." "Thank God," Webb said, and the gruff chief's voice was suspiciously husky. "That dog, he's something special." "He's a hero," Torres added. "I'm putting him in for a commendation. What he did today, Lieutenant Commander, it goes beyond bravery. He knowingly put himself between a bomb and multiple personnel. That's the kind of valor we give medals for." Jake felt a surge of pride mixed with exhaustion. He was just doing his job, protecting his team. "That's what heroes do," Torres said simply. The next 48 hours passed in a blur. Jake divided his time between the hospital, where he was treated for his own injuries, minor burns and lacerations that the doctors assured him would heal without complication, and the veterinary hospital where Thor was recovering. The dog had woken from anesthesia 12 hours after surgery, groggy and in pain, but immediately responsive to Jake's voice. The moment their eyes met, Thor's tail had thumped weakly against the bedding, and Jake had felt his shattered world begin to piece itself back together. The investigation into the attack moved swiftly. Torres and her NCIS team dismantled Vickers's network, uncovering a sophisticated espionage operation that had targeted multiple Special Operations Command facilities. Vickers had been the asset on the ground, but he'd been directed by handlers from a foreign intelligence service. The biological weapon had been supplied by them, a strategic attempt to eliminate key American operators and create chaos within the Special Operations community. The fact that it had been stopped by a German shepherd's nose and a handler's trust was a story that would become legend in the intelligence community, though the details would remain classified for years to come. On the third day after the attack, Jake was finally cleared to take Thor home, or at least back to his quarters on base. The dog was heavily bandaged and on pain medication, but mobile. Dr. Keller had provided extensive care instructions and scheduled follow-up appointments. Thor would need weeks of recovery, physical therapy, and possibly skin grafts for some of the more severe burns. But he would recover. He would heal. Jake carried Thor to his truck personally, refusing to let anyone else help. The German shepherd was lighter than usual, having lost weight during the trauma. But Jake held him carefully, mindful of the injuries. He settled Thor in the passenger seat, surrounded by blankets, and drove slowly back across the base. His quarters were simple, a small apartment reserved for senior officers. Jake helped Thor inside and onto the couch, arranging pillows to support his bandaged legs. The dog settled with a soft sigh, his eyes never leaving Jake's face. "You're going to be spoiled rotten during recovery," Jake informed him, kneeling beside the couch. "Whatever you want, steak dinners, extra treats, movies about dogs being heroes, which you'll probably find boring because you actually are one." Thor's tail managed a weak wag. Jake carefully scratched behind his ears, the one area that wasn't injured. There was a knock at the door. Jake opened it to find Special Agent Torres standing there, looking far more human than she had in her tactical gear. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down around her shoulders. "Agent Torres," Jake said, surprised. "I wasn't expecting you." "Rachel," she corrected. "When I'm not being a Fed, I'm just Rachel, and I wanted to check on you both. Officially, I need you to sign some final statements. Unofficially, I wanted to make sure you were okay." Jake stepped aside, letting her in. She immediately went to the couch, kneeling beside Thor. "Hey there, hero," she said softly, offering her hand for the dog to sniff. Thor gave it a careful sniff, then a weak lick of approval. "You're looking better than you did 3 days ago." "He's tough," Jake said. "Tougher than me." Rachel stood, accepting the papers Jake signed, but she didn't leave immediately. "You know, I've been doing this job for 15 years, she said. "I've seen a lot of things, investigated a lot of crimes, but I've never seen the kind of trust you have with Thor. The way you were willing to stake everything on his judgment, even when everyone was telling you that you were wrong. That level of partnership, it's rare, even among humans." "He's never let me down," Jake said simply. "Not once in 4 years. When he tells me something's wrong, something's wrong. I just have to be smart enough to listen." "You were smart enough," Rachel said. "You saved this base. Both of you." There was a pause, and Jake found himself studying her with new eyes. She wasn't just a federal agent. She was someone who understood the weight of responsibility, the burden of making impossible decisions, the loneliness that came with operating at the edge of society's darkness. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said. "That day, when Thor refused to enter the room, you backed my play. You authorized the safety halt, even though you had no concrete reason to." "Why?" Rachel smiled faintly. "Because I saw the look in your eyes, and I saw the look in Thor's eyes. That dog was terrified, and dogs like Thor don't get terrified of nothing. I may be a logic-based investigator, but I'm not stupid enough to ignore that kind of instinct. Humans, we think we're the apex predators, but we're not. We're just loud. Animals like Thor, they know things we've forgotten how to sense." "Thank you," Jake said, "for trusting us." "Thank you for being trustworthy," Rachel replied. She moved toward the door, then hesitated. "Look, I know you're going to be tied up with Thor's recovery for a while, but when you're both ready to get back to work, I might have some opportunities. NCIS uses K-9 teams, but we don't have many with your level of operational experience. If you ever get tired of training courses and evaluation exercises, there's real work out there. Important work. Jake considered this. I'll think about it. Once Thor is healed, we'll see what our options are. That's all I ask, Rachel said. She gave Thor one last, gentle pat. Take care of each other. After she left, Jake returned to the couch, sitting on the floor beside Thor. The German shepherd shifted, resting his head on Jake's leg. They sat in comfortable silence, two warriors recovering from battle, secure in the unbreakable bond they shared. You know, Jake said quietly, everyone keeps calling you a hero. And they're right. You are. But you're more than that to me. You're the reason I kept going when I wanted to quit. You're the reason I survived missions I shouldn't have survived. You're the reason I still believe there's good in this world, because you are good, pure good. Thor's tail thumped weakly against the cushions. So here's what we're going to do, Jake continued. We're going to get you healed, all the way healed, no rushing it, and then we're going to figure out what comes next. Maybe we take Rachel up on her offer. Maybe we stay here and train the next generation. I don't know yet. But whatever we do it together. Because that's what partners do. That's what brothers do. He rested his hand on Thor's head, feeling the steady rise and fall of the dog's breathing. Outside, the sun was setting over the San Gabriel Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The mountain air carried the scent of sage and the promise of a cold, clear night. For the first time in days, Jake felt the tension in his chest begin to ease. Thor was alive. They had survived. And whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as they always had. 3 months later, the auditorium at Naval Special Warfare Command was filled to capacity. The ceremony was invitation only, but word had spread, and nearly every SEAL team on the West Coast had sent representatives. The smell of freshly pressed uniforms mixed with anticipation as the crowd waited. Jake stood backstage, his dress uniform crisp and adorned with ribbons that told the story of his service. Beside him, Thor sat at perfect attention. The German shepherd's fur had grown back where it had been burned, though careful inspection would reveal the scar tissue beneath. He wore a new tactical vest, midnight blue with gold trim, specially designed for today's ceremony. "You ready for this, partner?" Jake asked quietly. Thor looked up at him with those intelligent amber eyes and gave a soft huff that Jake had learned to interpret as affirmation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice of the base commander echoed through the auditorium, "please rise for the presentation of honors." Jake and Thor walked onto the stage together, their movements synchronized through years of partnership. The audience rose, and Jake felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, but his focus was singular, keeping Thor calm and comfortable. The dog's physical recovery had been remarkable, but Jake knew the psychological scars of that day would take longer to heal. They both had nightmares now. They both startled at unexpected sounds. But they had each other, and that made all the difference. The commander, a 3-star admiral with steel-gray hair and a chest full of medals, stood at the podium. 3 months ago, he began, this facility was targeted by Persane, a sophisticated espionage operation designed to kill key personnel and compromise our national security. The attack was thwarted not by technology, not by standard security protocols, but by the instincts of a highly trained military working dog and the trust of his handler. The admiral turned to face Jake and Thor. Lieutenant Commander Jake Brennan and military working dog Thor represent the highest ideals of the Navy SEAL community: courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between warriors. Their actions on that day saved an estimated 50 to 100 lives and prevented a catastrophic security breach. He lifted a blue box from the table beside him. "It is my honor to present to military working dog Thor the Distinguished Service Medal, the highest honor that can be bestowed upon a K-9 service member. Thor, your courage under fire, your unwavering loyalty, and your heroic sacrifice embody the very best of military service." The admiral approached Thor, who sat at perfect attention. Jake gave the command, "Present." Thor lifted his right paw, and the Admiral carefully placed the medal around the dog's neck, a gold star suspended from a blue ribbon with white stripes. The auditorium erupted in applause. Jake looked down at Thor, whose tail was wagging now, the dog feeding off the positive energy in the room. Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. "And to Lieutenant Commander Brennan," the Admiral continued, "your willingness to trust your partner's judgment over direct orders, to risk your career for what you knew in your heart was right, demonstrates a level of leadership and moral courage that sets you apart. You are hereby awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for heroism involving life-threatening risk." The Admiral pinned the medal to Jake's uniform, then stepped back and saluted. Jake returned the salute crisply, then looked out at the audience. He saw Chief Webb, tears streaming down his weathered face. He saw Dr. Keller, the veterinarian, who had saved Thor's life, beaming with pride. He saw Special Agent Rachel Torres sitting in the front row, her expression a mixture of professional respect and something warmer. The commander gestured to the microphone. "Lieutenant Commander, would you like to say a few words?" Jake had prepared remarks. He had written and rewritten a speech about duty and sacrifice and the bond between handlers and their K9 partners. But standing there, looking at Thor sitting proudly beside him with his medal gleaming, all those prepared words seemed inadequate. "I'm not good with speeches," Jake began, his voice steady despite the emotion churning in his chest. "I'm better with actions, so I'll keep this simple. Thor saved my life that day. But the truth is, he's been saving my life every day for 4 years. He's taught me about loyalty, about trust, about what it means to serve something bigger than yourself." He paused, looking down at his partner. "There's a quote I heard once: 'Dogs are not place, our whole life. But they make our lives whole.' Thor doesn't just make my life whole. He gives my life meaning. Every operator in this room understands the bond we share with our K9 partners. They're not just tools. They're not just assets. They're family. They're brothers and sisters in arms." Jake's voice grew stronger. What happened 3 months ago demonstrated something critical. In a world of advanced technology, of AI and drones and satellite surveillance, sometimes the most sophisticated threat detection system is a dog's nose and a handler who trusts his partner. Thor knew something was wrong before any of our equipment could detect it. He risked his life to save others. That's not training. That's courage. That's love. He looked out at the audience. So today, as we honor Thor, I want every handler in this room to remember: trust your partner. Listen when they tell you something's wrong, even if you can't see the threat. They know. They always know. And if you give them the trust they deserve, they'll never let you down." The applause that followed was thunderous. Jake knelt beside Thor, and the dog pressed his head against Jake's chest, the simple gesture that meant everything. The ceremony continued with more speeches, more recognition, but Jake barely heard it. His entire world had narrowed to the warm, solid presence of his partner and the knowledge that they had survived together. After the ceremony, there was a reception in an adjacent hall. Jake found himself surrounded by well-wishers, fellow operators who wanted to shake his hand and pet Thor. The German Shepherd handled the attention with patient dignity, though Jake could tell he was getting tired. Physical therapy had strengthened Thor's body, but he still tired more easily than before the explosion. Rachel Torres approached, looking professional in a dark suit. "Hell of a speech, Lieutenant Commander." "Jake," he corrected. "I think we're past formalities, don't you?" She smiled. "Jake, then, have you thought any more about my offer? NCIS could really use a team like you two." Jake had thought about it. A lot. The truth was, Echo Ridge felt different now. The training facility held too many memories of that day. And more importantly, he and Thor had proven something. They worked best when the stakes were real, when their instincts and training could be applied to genuine threats rather than simulated scenarios. "I've thought about it," Jake said. "And I've talked to my command. If the offer still stands, Thor and I would be interested in discussing a transfer to NCIS operations." Rachel's smile widened. "The offer stands. In fact, I've already got a case file that could use your particular skill set. International smuggling ring operating out of San Diego ports. We suspect they're moving more than just narcotics. Could be weapons, could be biological materials. We need a K-9 team that can detect threats, standard protocols, miss. Sounds interesting, Jake said. He looked down at Thor, who was watching Rachel with alert interest. What do you think, partner? Ready for a new mission? Thor's tail wagged, and he let out a soft bark. Yes. Then I guess we're in, Jake said. Over the following months, Jake and Thor transitioned from the military's rigid structure to the more flexible world of federal law enforcement. It was an adjustment, but in many ways, it felt right. They were still serving, still protecting, but with more autonomy and the freedom to follow their instincts. Their first case with NCIS was a success, breaking up a smuggling ring that had been operating for years. Thor's ability to detect not just explosives, but the chemical signatures of fear and hostile intent proved invaluable. He could identify which dockworkers were nervous because they were hiding something versus those who were just nervous around federal agents. The arrests led to the seizure of weapons-grade materials that could have been used in terrorist attacks across multiple cities. More cases followed. Each one reinforced what Jake had learned that day at Echo Ridge. Trust your partner, listen to what they're telling you, and never underestimate the instincts of a dog who has been trained to protect. One evening, nearly a year after the attack, Jake and Thor sat on a beach in La Jolla, watching the sun set over the Pacific. Thor had made a full recovery, his physical scars hidden beneath his fur, his spirit as strong as ever. Jake's nightmares had faded, replaced by a sense of purpose that felt more genuine than anything he'd experienced during his years in combat. You know, Jake said, throwing a tennis ball for Thor to chase, I used to think my purpose was being a SEAL, being the best operator I could be. But I was wrong. My purpose is this, right here, being your partner. Thor returned with the ball, dropping it at Jake's feet. His amber eyes reflected the golden light of the setting sun. We make a pretty good team, don't we? Jake continued, scratching behind Thor's ears. You with your super nose and your ability to sense danger. Me with my opposable thumbs and ability to fill out paperwork. Thor huffed, a sound that Jake had learned to interpret as amusement. I never thanked you properly, Jake said, his tone becoming more serious. For saving my life that day. For being willing to run into an explosion to protect everyone. You didn't have to do that. You could have stayed safe. But you chose to protect us. You chose to be a hero. He pulled Thor close, wrapping his arms around the dog's strong shoulders. I don't know what I did to deserve a partner like you, but I'm grateful every single day. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Thor. And I promise you, for whatever time we have left together, I'm going to make it count. We're going to keep making a difference. We're going to keep protecting people. Together. Thor leaned into the embrace, his tail wagging contentedly. The sound of waves crashing against the shore provided a peaceful rhythm, a reminder that after the chaos and violence of their past, there was still beauty in the world. Still moments of tranquility worth fighting for. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Jake stood. Come on, partner. Let's go home. They walked back along the beach, man and dog, partners and brothers. Two warriors who had learned that the strongest bond is forged not just in combat, but in trust, in loyalty, and in the unwavering willingness to sacrifice everything for those you love. Behind them, their footprints in the sand slowly disappeared as the tide came in, washed away by the eternal rhythm of the ocean. But the bond they shared, the lives they had saved, and the legacy they were building together would last forever. In a world of darkness and uncertainty, Lieutenant Commander Jake Brennan and military working dog Thor were a reminder that heroes still exist, that loyalty still matters, that the ancient bond between human and canine, forged over thousands of years of partnership, remains one of the most powerful forces in the world. And sometimes, the greatest act of courage is simply trusting the one who has never given you reason to doubt. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart, Please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes still exist. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments, what was your favorite moment? Was it Thor's refusal to enter that room, Jake's willingness to trust his partner, or the moment Thor pushed the bomber back and saved everyone? We read every comment. God bless, and see you in the next story.